Chapter 3, Section 2. The next day happened to be Sunday, so there was no way to run into Nonomiya at school. Still, it nagged at Sanshiro that Nonomiya had been looking for him the day before. As luck would have it, he had never visited the new house before, so he decided to go over there himself and find out what was needed. He'd made up his mind to go in the morning, but he kept dawdling over the newspaper, and before he knew it, it was noon. After lunch, just as he was about to head out, an old friend from Kumamoto showed up out of the blue. By the time Sanshiro finally managed to see him off, it was past 4 o'clock. It was getting a bit late, but he headed out as planned. Nonomiya's place was quite far. He had moved to Okubo just 4 or 5 days before, but with the streetcar, he could get there easily enough. He'd heard it was somewhere near the station, so finding the place wouldn't be a problem. To be honest, ever since that visit to the Hirano house, Sanshiro had been having a streak of bad luck. He had meant to go to the higher commercial school in Kanda, so he boarded the streetcar at Hongo Yonchomi, only to ride past his stop all the way to Kudan. From there, he got carried all the way to Iidabashi, where he finally managed to transfer to the Sotobori line, came out from Ochanomizu to Kandabashi. He was still completely lost, hurrying along Kamakuragashi in the direction of Tsukiyabashi. Ever since that little adventure, Sanshiro had been feeling pretty uneasy about streetcars in general. But since he'd heard the Kobu line ran in a straight shot, he felt safe enough to just get on and ride. He got off at Okubo Station, and instead of heading toward Toyama School along the Naka Hayakunin Road, he turned right at the crossing. The path narrowed to barely 3 feet wide. The path climbed gently upward on a slight incline, and at the top stood a sparse grove of moso bamboo. On either side of the grove, one house on each end, people lived. Nonomiya's house was the one on the near side. A small gate stood at a diagonal, seemingly with no regard whatsoever for the direction of the path. Once inside, the house itself was in an equally unexpected spot. The gate and the entrance both looked like they'd been added on as an afterthought. Next to the kitchen, there was a fine hedge, but on the garden side, there was no dividing boundary at all. There was only a tall bush clover, growing well above head height, just barely hiding the veranda of the main room. Nonomiya was sitting in a chair he'd brought out to the veranda, reading a Western magazine. When he saw Sanshiro come in, "Come around here," he said. It was exactly the same greeting he'd given Sanshiro down in the basement of the science building. Sanshiro hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to come in through the garden or go around to the front entrance. Then once again came the call. "This way," he urged again, so Sanshiro made up his mind and stepped up into the house from the garden. The sitting room doubled as a study, 8 tatami mats in size, with a surprisingly large collection of Western books. Nonomiya got up from his chair and sat down on the floor. Sanshiro made small talk, saying things like what a quiet neighborhood it was, and how you could get to Ochanomizu pretty quickly from here, and asking how the telescope tests were coming along. After some idle small talk, "I heard you were looking for me yesterday. Is there something you need?" he asked. At that, Nonomiya looked a little apologetic and said, "Oh, it's nothing really," he said. Sanshiro just said, "Oh, I see. And you came all this way for that?" "Oh, it's nothing like that. Actually, my mother back home sent over something really nice, saying her son has been causing you all sorts of trouble. I just wanted to take a moment to thank you as well." "Oh, really? Did she send something?" "Yes, it's red fish pickled in sake leaves." "Ah, that would be himeichi then." Sanshiro thought it was a pretty unremarkable thing to send. But Nonomiya had all kinds of questions about the himeichi. Sanshiro explained exactly how to eat it. He told Nonomiya to grill the fish right in the sake leaves and only scrape them off just as you're about to transfer it to the plate, because if you remove them any earlier, all the flavor goes with them. The two of them went back and forth about himeichi until the sun went down. Sanshiro was just about to say his goodbyes and head home when a telegram arrived from somewhere. Nonomiya tore open the telegram and read it, then muttered under his breath, "This is a problem." Sanshiro wasn't sure he could just sit there acting like nothing had happened, but he also didn't feel right prying into someone else's business, so he simply Did something happen? He asked, in a flat, mechanical tone. Nonomiya looked up at him and, "Oh, it's nothing serious," he said, and held out the telegram for Sanshiro to see. It said, "Come at once." "Are you going somewhere?" "Yeah, my sister's been sick for a while now and she's staying in the university hospital. She's asking me to come right away," he said, with no sign of alarm whatsoever. Sanshiro, on the other hand, was the one who was surprised. All at once, Sanshiro's mind was spinning, pulling together Nonomiya's sister, her illness, and the university hospital, then throwing in the woman he'd met by the pond, all of it swirling around inside him at once. So she must be pretty bad off then. No, I doubt it's anything like that. You see, our mother is there taking care of her, so, well, if it were really serious, she'd be better off jumping on a tram and rushing over here herself. Oh, it's probably just my sister being silly. She pulls this kind of stunt all the time. She's probably been waiting all day, expecting him to come visit on Sunday since he hasn't stopped by even once since moving here. So, he said, tilting his head to one side, lost in thought. Still, you should go, just in case it's serious. I suppose. It's not likely things would change that suddenly in just 4 or 5 days without a visit. But I suppose I'd better go check. Yes, you really ought to go. Really, Nonomiya decided to go. And having made that decision, he told Sanshiro there was a favor he needed to ask. If the telegram turned out to be about an actual illness, he might not make it back that night. That meant the only one left behind would be the maid. And she was terribly timid, on top of which the neighborhood had been unusually rough lately. Since Sanshiro happened to be there at just the right time, Nonomiya asked if he would mind staying the night, as long as it wouldn't interfere with his classes the next day. Of course, if it turned out to be nothing, he would be back shortly. If he had known ahead of time, he would have asked Soseki to come, but it was too late for that now. It was just one night, and he didn't even know yet whether he'd be staying at the hospital or not. So asking someone with no real connection to the situation to put themselves out like this was asking too much. He couldn't quite bring himself to insist, but of course Nonomiya hadn't put it nearly that smoothly. The thing was, Sanshiro was the kind of person who... Sanshiro was exactly the kind of man who didn't need to be asked so smoothly, so he agreed right away. When the maid asked about dinner, Nonomiya just said, "Not eating," and left Sanshiro to fend for himself, telling him, "Sorry to be rude, but please help yourself to supper on your own," and abandoned him there, and he left. He had barely stepped out when his voice boomed from somewhere in the dark haggieweed. "Feel free to read any of the books in my study. Nothing particularly interesting, but help yourself to whatever looks good. There are even a few novels," he called out, and then he was gone. Sanshiro walked Nonomiya to the veranda to see him off, and as he said his goodbyes, the Moso bamboo grove, no more than 3 tsubo of it, was sparse enough that he could still make out each individual stalk. Before long, Sanshiro was sitting alone in the middle of the 8-mat study, eating his supper at a small dining tray. He glanced at the tray, and sure enough, just as his host had said, there was himeichi sweetfish on it. It was like catching a whiff of home after so long, which made him happy. But the food itself wasn't nearly as good as that feeling suggested. When the maid came in to serve, Sanshiro saw that her face was exactly as his host had described, with timid, nervous-looking features. Once the meal was done, she retreated to the kitchen. Left alone, Sanshiro settled into the quiet, and all at once he found himself worrying about Nonomiya's sister. He had a feeling she might be critically ill. He couldn't shake the feeling that Nonomiya was taking too long to get there. And he kept feeling more and more that his sister was the same woman he had seen the other day. Sanshiro went over it all again in his mind, picturing the woman's face, her eyes, the way she was dressed, exactly as she had been that day, and placed her on a hospital bed. He stood Nonomiya beside her and let them exchange a few words. But somehow having Nonomiya there as her brother wasn't enough, and before he knew it, Sanshiro had taken his place instead and tenderly nursed her back to health. Just then a train roared past right below the bamboo grove, and the room gave a slight shudder, whether from the way the joists were laid or from the soil beneath. Sanshiro stopped his daydream of nursing her and looked around the room. It really did seem like an old building, the pillars worn with age. On the other hand, the sliding doors didn't fit right in their frames. The ceiling was pitch black. Only the lamp shone with any modern brightness. It was much the same with a modern scholar like Nonomiya, who had taken a fancy to renting a place like this and spending his days gazing out at a bamboo grove straight out of the feudal era. If it's just a personal preference, that's entirely his own business. But if he's been driven out to the suburbs by necessity, that's truly a sad thing. From what he'd heard, a scholar of that caliber was only getting 55 yen a month from the university. That must be why he has no choice but to go teach at a private school. And now his sister's in the hospital on top of that, which must be brutal. Moving to Okubo might have been a matter of finances too, one way or another. It was still early in the evening, but out here in this part of town, everything was utterly still. From somewhere out in the garden came the sound of insects. Sitting there alone, he felt the loneliness of early autumn settling in. Then, from somewhere far off, a voice called out, just a little while longer. A voice called out from somewhere saying, "Oh, just a little longer now." It seemed to be coming from behind the house, but it was too far away to be sure, and it was over before he could even figure out which direction it had come from. But to Sanshiro's ears, those words came through clearly as the genuine soliloquy of someone abandoned by the whole world, spoken with no expectation of a reply from anyone. Sanshiro felt a chill run through him. Just then, the sound of a train came rumbling in from far away. The sound grew steadily closer, and as it passed beneath the grove of bamboo, it roared by at twice the volume of the train before it. Sanshiro had been sitting there in a daze, waiting for the trembling of the room to die down, when in a flash he connected the cry he had heard earlier with the roar of the train just now, linked by a single thread of cause and effect. And then he jolted to his feet, because what that connection implied was terrifying. It was at that moment that Sanshiro discovered just how difficult it was to stay seated. From his spine all the way down to the soles of his feet, a crawling, prickling unease ran through him. He got up and went to the bathroom. Peering out the window, he saw a sky full of stars spreading in every direction, and the railway track below the embankment was dead silent. Still, he pressed his nose between the bamboo lattice slats and peered out into the darkness. Just then, a man carrying a paper lantern came walking along the rails from the direction of the station. From the sound of voices, there seemed to be 3 or 4 of them. The lantern's shadow disappeared past the crossing and down below the embankment. And when it passed under the grove of bamboo, all that remained was voices. But every word came through clear as day. Just a little further ahead, the footsteps faded off into the distance. Sanshiro slipped around to the garden, shoved his feet into his wooden sandals, and scrambled down the earthen bank, just over a yard high from the bamboo grove, then took off after the lantern. He'd only gone about 5 or 6 yards when someone else came jumping down from the embankment. "Is it a train death?" Sanshiro tried to say something back, but the words wouldn't come out. By then, the dark figure had already moved on past him. He figured this was probably the owner of the house that lay beyond Nonomiya's place, and followed along behind him, thinking it over. After about half a block, the lantern stopped. The people had stopped too. The person stood holding the lantern up, saying nothing. Sanshiro looked in silence at what lay beneath the light. There, on the ground, was half a body. The train had torn cleanly through her, from the right shoulder, under the breast, and up to the hip, leaving the diagonal slice of her torso behind. Her face was untouched. She was a young woman. Sanshiro still remembers exactly how he felt in that moment. He turned to leave right away, but his legs locked up and he could barely move. He crawled back up the embankment and returned to his room, and then his heart started pounding. He called for the maid to ask for some water, and she seemed, thankfully, to have no idea what had happened. Then, after a little while, a commotion started up somewhere in the back of the house. Sanshiro realized the landlord must have come home. Soon there was a commotion at the foot of the embankment. Then it died down and everything went quiet again. The silence was almost unbearable. Right before Sanshiro's eyes, the woman's face appeared with vivid clarity. When he put it all together, that face, the faint, helpless sound of her voice, ah, 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 and the terrible fate that must have been lurking behind both of them. It was as if the very root of life, that sturdy, dependable thing, had been quietly loosening all along, ready at any moment to drift off into the dark. Sanshiro was so frightened he couldn't think straight, couldn't want anything. It lasted only a single instant. But up until that moment, he had surely been alive. Just then, Sanshiro suddenly remembered what the man on the train had said, the one who had given him the peach. Watch out, be careful, it's dangerous. And yet, even as he kept saying it was dangerous, that man had seemed completely at ease. In other words, if he were standing somewhere safe enough to call out, watch out to others, he could probably become someone like that man. There may be a certain pleasure in living in this world while watching it from the outside. The way that man had eaten the peach on the train, and then at Aokido, the way he'd sat there sipping tea and smoking and sipping tea, just staring straight ahead, that man was exactly this kind of person, a critic. Sanshiro tried out the word critic with a peculiar meaning in mind, and once he did, he was quietly impressed with himself for landing on it so well. More than that, he even began to wonder if he himself might exist as a critic in the future. Looking at that grim, lifeless face had stirred something like that in him. Sanshiro looked around the room, taking in the table in the corner, the chair in front of it, the bookcase beside the chair. He looked over the Western books neatly lined up in the bookcase, and thought that the owner of this quiet study was, just like that critic, living in peace and contentment. After all, he would never run a woman over just to study the pressure of light. His host's sister was sick, yes, but it wasn't a sickness her brother had caused her. She caught it herself, that's all. His thoughts kept drifting from one thing to the next, until before he knew it, 11 o'clock had come. The last tram to Nakano was gone. Then he started worrying again, wondering if maybe her condition had gotten worse, and that's why they hadn't come back. Just then, a telegram arrived from Nonomiya. It said his sister was fine and would be home the next morning. Reassured, Sanshiro went to bed, but his dreams that night were deeply unsettling. The woman who had tried to throw herself under a train was someone connected to Nonomiya, and Nonomiya, knowing this, had not come home. He had only sent the telegram to put Sanshiro's mind at ease. The sister is safe part was a lie, and the sister had actually died at the same hour the woman had thrown herself under the train. And that sister was none other than the woman Sanshiro had met by the pond. Sanshiro woke up the next morning earlier than usual. He gazed at the rumpled bedding where he'd tossed and turned and lit a cigarette. Everything from the night before felt like a dream. He stepped out onto the veranda and looked up at the sky beyond the low eaves. It was a beautiful day. The whole world had the look of something that had just become bright and new. After finishing breakfast and having his tea, Sanshiro dragged a chair out to the veranda and was reading the newspaper when Nonomiya came back, just as he'd promised. "I heard there was someone killed by a train near here last night," he said. He must have picked that up at the station or somewhere along the way. Sanshiro told him everything that had happened. "You don't say. That's rare. You don't get a chance like that every day. I wish I'd stayed home. The body's probably been cleared away by now, though. No point going to look, I suppose." "Probably too late for that," Sanshiro answered briefly. But he was struck by how casually Nonomiya-kun took the whole thing. Sanshiro put it down entirely to the difference between night and day, this apparent lack of feeling on Nonomiya's part. It never even crossed his mind that the same detached attitude he brought to testing the pressure of light was simply showing up here too. He was still young, that was probably why. Sanshiro changed the subject and asked about the sick person. According to Nonomiya, it turned out that, just as Sanshiro had guessed, there was nothing wrong with the patient. It was simply that she hadn't had a visit in 5 or 6 days, and feeling a little neglected, she'd lured her brother over just to have something to do. Apparently, she had been upset that he hadn't come to see her, even though it was a Sunday. So Nonomiya called his sister an idiot. He genuinely seemed to think she was foolish. His reasoning was that it was stupid to waste precious time belonging to someone as busy as himself. But Sanshiro barely understood what he meant by that. If his sister wanted to see him badly enough to send a telegram, he shouldn't mind giving up a Sunday night or even two for her sake. Time spent with someone like that, that's what real time is. Spending your days down in some underground lab running light experiments. Now that's the kind of idle, detached existence that has nothing to do with real life. If he were Nonomiya, he thought, he would actually be glad to have his studies interrupted by a sister like that. That was roughly how Sanshiro felt about it, though at that moment he had forgotten all about the death on the tracks. Nonomiya said he hadn't slept well the night before and was feeling foggy and out of it. Luckily, today he had to go to Waseda school in the afternoon, and since the university was closed, he said he was going to sleep until then. "Were you up pretty late?" Sanshiro asked, and Nonomiya said that as a matter of fact, it happened that an old teacher from higher school, someone called Hirota, had come to visit his sister, and they all ended up talking so long that he missed the last tram, so he ended up staying the night. He should have stayed the night at Hirota's place, but his sister threw a fit and absolutely insisted he stay at the hospital instead, so he had no choice, and ended up sleeping in that cramped little room. It was so cramped and uncomfortable that he couldn't get to sleep. "My sister is such a fool," he said, going after her again. Sanshiro found himself trying not to laugh. He thought about putting in a word in her defense, but somehow it felt awkward, so he let it go. Instead, he asked about Mr. Hirota. By now, Sanshiro had heard the name Hirota 3 or 4 times, and in his mind, he had quietly attached that name to the man with the white peaches and the man at Aokido, and the incident at the main gate, where a mean-tempered horse had given him such a hard time and left him a laughingstock to the barber's apprentices. He had quietly assigned to Prof. Hirota as well. But now, hearing this, it turned out the horse incident had indeed involved Prof. Hirota. And so Sanshiro made up his mind that the peach business must have been the same man too. When he thought about it, the logic seemed a little shaky. On his way out, he was asked to do him a favor, and could he please drop off a lined kimono at the hospital by morning? Sanshiro was absolutely delighted. He had on his new square-shaped cap, and he felt a little proud knowing he'd be wearing it to the hospital. He walked out of Nonomiya's house with a clear, bright expression. He got off the streetcar at Ochanomizu and jumped straight into a rickshaw, which was quite unlike his usual self. He had the rickshaw pull smartly through the Akamon gate just as the bell from the Faculty of Law and Literature started ringing. At this hour, on any normal day, he'd be heading into classroom number 8 with his notebook and ink bottle. He didn't care about missing a lecture or two and rode straight up to the entrance of the Aoyama Internal Medicine Ward. He followed the directions he'd been given, going past the entrance toward the back, turning right at the second corner, then left at the end of the hall, and sure enough, there it was. A small black nameplate hung on the door, with the name Yoshiko Nonomiya written on it in kana. Sanshiro stood there for a moment just staring at the name. Being from the country, he didn't do anything as clever as knock. The person in that room is Nonomiya's younger sister, a girl named Yoshiko. Sanshiro stood there, turning it over in his mind. Part of him wanted to open the door and see her face, and part of him dreaded being disappointed. The problem was that the face drifting through his mind looked nothing like Nonomiya Sohachi. A nurse came up behind him, the soft shuffle of her sandals drawing near. Sanshiro made up his mind and pushed the door open halfway, then found himself looking straight at the woman inside. One hand still on the handle, she had large eyes, a slender nose, thin lips, and a wide forehead that made her face look almost angular, tapering down to a hollow jaw. That was all there was to her features. And yet, in that face, Sanshiro saw for the very first time in his life a flash of expression, an instant of something that lit up in that single moment. Behind her pale forehead, thick hair fell naturally to her shoulders. The morning light from the east window fell on her from behind, and where her hair and the sunlight met, it glowed a soft violet, She wore a living halo of light around her, and yet her face and brow were deeply shadowed, dark and pale. Within that darkness were eyes that seemed to belong somewhere far away, like high clouds hanging still in the depths of the sky, too remote to be moved easily. And yet it couldn't stay still either. It simply moved, like a gentle flow. That was the look in her eyes when she glanced at Sanshiro. In that expression, Sanshiro found a unity of languid melancholy and unconcealed brightness. That unified feeling was, for Sanshiro, one of the most precious fragments of human experience he had ever encountered. And it felt like a profound discovery. Sanshiro stood there gripping the door handle, his face half inside the room, half still hidden by the door frame. And in that one fleeting moment, he let himself go completely. "Come in," she said, as if she had been waiting for him. There was a warmth in her voice that you simply wouldn't find in someone you'd just met. Only a perfectly innocent child, or a woman who had known every kind of man, could pull that off so naturally. It wasn't familiarity exactly. It was more like they had always known each other. At the same moment, she moved her not quite full cheeks and smiled, just a little. Her pale face took on a warmth that felt somehow dear. Sanshiro's feet carried him naturally into the room. In that moment, an image of his mother, far away in his hometown, flashed through his mind. When he stepped around the door and finally faced her head-on, a woman who looked to be past 50 greeted Sanshiro. The woman had apparently risen from her seat and was waiting before Sanshiro had even stepped out from behind the door. "You must be Ogawa," she said, speaking up first. Her face resembled Nonomiya's. It resembled his daughter's too, but only resembled, nothing more. He handed over the bundle he'd been asked to deliver. She took it and thanked him. "Please, have a seat," she said, gesturing to a chair, then made her way around to the far side of the bed. The futon spread over the bed was pure white. The blanket on top was just as white. She had folded back the bedding at a diagonal, about halfway, and then settled herself into a seat by the window, carefully avoiding the thick, bunched-up part at the foot. Her feet didn't quite reach the floor. She had a pair of knitting needles in her hand. A ball of yarn had rolled under the bed, trailing a long red thread from her fingers. Sanshiro thought about reaching under the bed to retrieve the ball of yarn for her, but she seemed completely indifferent to it, so he held back. The mother from across the room kept thanking Sanshiro for the night before. She said things like, "You must have been so busy." Sanshiro said, "Oh, not at all, I wasn't doing anything anyway." While the two of them talked, Yoshiko stayed quiet. When their conversation reached a pause, she suddenly asked, "Did you see the person who got run over last night?" She glanced over at a newspaper in the corner of the room. Sanshiro said, "Yes." Then, tilting her head slightly to one side, she looked at him and asked, "Were you frightened?" She had a long neck, just like her brother. Sanshiro sat there watching the way she tilted it, without answering whether he'd been scared or not. Part of it was that the question was so simple he didn't know how to answer. The other part was that he simply forgot to answer at all. She seemed to realize this, and straightened her head back up. A faint blush crept into her pale cheeks. Sanshiro decided it was time to go. He said his goodbyes, stepped out of the room, and made his way to the front entrance. Looking ahead, the far end of the long corridor opened up into a bright square of light, where the green of the outside world shimmered at the threshold. The woman from the pond was standing there. The shock of it threw Sanshiro's stride completely off. In that same moment, the woman's dark silhouette, painted against the clear, transparent air like a canvas, took one step forward. Sanshiro moved forward too, as if drawn along. The two of them approached each other, bound by fate to pass somewhere along that single narrow corridor. Then the woman turned around. Beyond her, in the bright outdoor air, there was nothing but the soft green of early autumn floating in the light. When she turned back to look at him, there was nothing there in that bright square doorway, and no one waiting for it either. In that moment, Sanshiro took in every detail of the woman, her posture and what she was wearing. The color of her kimono. He had no name for it. It was like the shadowy reflection of dark evergreens cast across the water of the university pond on an overcast day. A vivid pattern of stripes ran straight down the length of the fabric from top to bottom. The stripes ran straight through, yet rippled as they went, drawing close to each other and pulling apart, merging into thick bands and splitting again into two. Irregular, yet not disordered. About a third of the way down, a wide sash divided it horizontally. The sash had a warmth to it, probably because of the yellow in it. As she turned to look back, her right shoulder pulled away while her left hand stayed at her hip and came forward. She was holding a handkerchief. The part of the handkerchief that spilled past her fingers hung open, soft and loose, the way silk does. From the waist down, her posture was perfectly composed. The woman turned back around to face forward. She had cast her eyes down and taken a couple of steps toward Sanshiro when she suddenly pulled her head back slightly and looked straight at him. She had long, double-lidded eyes with a calm, composed look about them, alive beneath distinctly dark brows. At the same moment, a set of beautiful teeth appeared. The contrast between those teeth and the color of her complexion was something Sanshiro knew he could never forget. Today, she had dusted her face lightly with powder, but it wasn't so thick as to hide her natural complexion. The fine, textured skin had a healthy, warm color to it, the kind that looked like it could hold up against strong sunlight, and over that, the thinnest dusting of powder. Not a face that shone with a glossy sheen. Her flesh was firm everywhere, cheeks and chin alike, with hardly anything to spare over the bone. And yet her face, taken as a whole, was soft. It wasn't that her flesh was soft, but rather that the bones themselves seemed soft. Hers was a face that gave a sense of great depth. The woman bowed. Sanshiro was less surprised that a stranger had bowed to him than he was struck by how gracefully she did it. From the waist up, she bowed forward, light as a sheet of paper caught by the wind. Quick, too. And then, at just the right angle, she stopped. Clean and effortless. It wasn't something she'd learned or practiced. That much was clear. "Excuse me, could I ask you something?" The voice came from between white teeth, crisp and clear, and yet there was an ease about her, a natural composure. She simply didn't seem like the kind of person who would ask someone whether chinquapin trees bear fruit in the middle of summer. Sanshiro had no room in his head for any of that. He just stopped and said, "Yes? Could you tell me where room 15 is?" Room 15 was the very room Sanshiro had just come out of. "Is that Nonomiya's room?" he asked. This time it was the woman's turn to say yes. "Nonomiya's room? Sure, just go around that corner up ahead, walk straight to the end, then turn left, and it's the second door on the right." "That corner there," she said, extending a slender finger. "Yes, just around that next corner." "Thank you so much." And with that, she walked on past. Sanshiro stood there watching the woman walk away. She reached the corner, and just as she was about to turn, she looked back. Sanshiro was so flustered he nearly turned red. The woman smiled, and with a little look on her face seemed to ask, "This corner here?" Sanshiro nodded without thinking. Her figure turned the corner and disappeared into the white wall. Sanshiro drifted out through the entrance. He walked 5 or 6 steps, wondering if she'd mistaken him for a medical student and asked him the room number by mistake, but then it suddenly hit him. When she asked him about room 15, he should have turned back to Yoshiko's room and shown her the way himself. What a waste. Sanshiro couldn't bring himself to turn back now. He had no choice but to walk on another 5 or 6 steps, but this time he stopped dead in his tracks. The color of the ribbon the woman had been wearing flashed through Sanshiro's mind. The moment it struck him that the ribbon she was wearing was the same color and fabric as the one Nonomiya had bought at Kaneyasu, Sanshiro suddenly felt his legs go heavy. He shuffled out along the side of the library toward the main gate, when Yojiro appeared out of nowhere and called out to him. "Hey, why did you skip class today?" "Today I sat through a lecture on how Italians eat macaroni," he said, coming up beside Sanshiro and clapping him on the shoulder. The two of them walked together for a bit. When they reached the main gate, Sanshiro said, "Hey, do you think people still wear light ribbons this time of year?" "That's only for the hottest part of summer, isn't it?" Sanshiro asked. Yojiro burst out laughing. "Go ask Professor So-and-so. He knows everything," Yojiro said with a laugh, brushing the question off. At the main gate, Sanshiro announced that he wasn't feeling well and had skipped school for the day. Yojiro turned and headed back toward the classroom, looking very much like someone who'd just wasted a trip.